In this video, I'm going to talk about this brand new ITX case from Cooler Master, the Ncore 100 Max. It is a very stylish and a very unique looking case that comes with a pre-installed power supply and a pre-installed water cooler, which makes it very user-friendly and very beginner-friendly. And even though it has a very small footprint, you can actually build a pretty high-end gaming system and stuff a pretty large high-end graphics card in this case. But there are also some things that you need to know about it, and there's some things that you need to consider before rushing to the store to buy one of these. So let's check it out. Let's see how it performs in terms of thermals and noise. Let's see how well it is actually built. And most importantly, let's see if it's worth getting it or not. Let's begin. I have a black and bronze version right here, but if you prefer, you can also get it in black and gray. Now, I do think that this bronze color stands out a bit more, while the gray version would be more of a safer choice. But either way, the case itself is different enough and unique enough to stand out no matter which color you end up choosing. A big focus with this case is definitely its smaller footprint. It doesn't take that much space on your desk, but it is very tall for an ITX case. Now, I would say it is about as tall as your typical ATX mid-tower would be, and much larger than an NZXT H1, for example. So it is not that small in terms of volume, but if you're limited by your desk space and not by the height, this case can be very interesting. I think it's a pretty clean design as well. It is not small enough so you forget you have a PC on your desk, and it does have ventilation on all sides, but it is still fairly minimalistic. It doesn't have any RGB, and it can blend into a normal setup easily. I also like that they kept the power light very simple. It is just the outline of the Cooler Master logo near the bottom of the case, and the front I/O is positioned also on the bottom, but on the side, which I personally really like because I use those ports very often, and this way you don't have card readers, USB sticks, or any other types of cables just sticking out the top, like most cases do. The motherboard I/O also sits on the back and not under the case like on the Corsair 2000D, so the rear I/O is also very easy to reach. Only the GPU connections come out underneath the case, but once you connect your monitors, you don't really need to access those anymore, or definitely not that often, so I don't really mind this design decision. To open the case, you simply need to pull out the two colored panels, and they're just clicked in place, so you don't need any extra tools, and you first pull on one side, then on the other. The 850 watt power supply is pre-installed right above the motherboard, positioned nicely and with fitted short cables, so connecting the whole system was really easy, and you don't need to worry about cable managing lots of bulky cables. The pre-installed all-in-one cooler sits at the top, and even though it's only a 120mm model, it is a lot thicker than a typical water cooler, so in theory, its performance should be closer to a 240mm model. The case comes with its own GPU riser pre-installed as well, so the graphics card has its own space on the other side of the motherboard, and in this default position, I tried a couple of different 4080 Super cards, and the Founders Edition and the MSI Expert fit easily, but both of those cards have a flow-through design, and in this case, you don't have that much space behind the card, so that is not really the ideal option. But the Palit RTX 4080 Super Jetstream fit perfectly, and that is the card I end up using for this build. If you go for something smaller, like a 4070-ish or lower, it's gonna fit easily. But if you want to go even bigger, you can actually make the case a little bit wider and move the GPU bracket a bit lower, and you will be able to fit GPUs of up to about 36 centimeters in length and about 8 centimeters thick. Just keep in mind that if you do lower the GPU position, you should probably buy an angled HDMI or DisplayPort cable for your monitor, because the connection is at the bottom of the case and you might not have enough space for a regular cable. But for the majority of builds, the default configuration of this case offers plenty of space, and any typical cable will work just fine. To power the GPU, you get an angled 12-volt high-power cable that can be a bit awkward and push too much against the case for most GPUs, except for ASUS models because they reverse their connectors, which is not really a huge problem, but I would prefer if they just added an extra straight 12-volt high-power connector as well. For AMD cards and other models that don't use this cable, you do get 3 typical 8-pin power cables as well. Other than an ITX motherboard and a big GPU, there isn't really much else you can add to your build. There's only a single 120mm fan spot and a fan that is already pre-installed. And the only storage option is a spot for a single 2.5-inch drive. Now, I don't really think that's a big problem because many ITX motherboards come with 2 M.2 slots nowadays, and 4TB NVMe's are pretty common. But if you were planning to use those large mechanical hard drives, this case is not for you. But keeping it simple really does make this one of the easiest cases to work with. So the motherboard and connections are very easy to reach. There's basically no cable management to worry about. And when you're done, you just click the panels back on and that's it. I don't really like the white LED on the pump that you can clearly see through the panels because it doesn't go well with the design and it just breaks the overall clean look of the case. And there's no way to turn it off. Now, I guess they just reused the part from another cooler design, but they should have considered the overall look of the case. And if it bothers you as well, you can always just use some black tape to cover it up. But unfortunately, no amount of tape can easily fix the minimum fan speed of the power supply. So even with the system in idle, you can really hear it, and it measured 35 decibels at a 50 centimeter distance, which isn't super loud, but it is always kind of there. And I know that some reviewers measured much lower idle noise levels, but a few others had similar results as I did. So it's definitely not just an issue with this particular specific sample, but a few more as well. And I have quite a few Cooler Master SFX power supplies that are completely silent in idle, so I do think this might be a first batch issue or something like that, but it is definitely something to check if you end up buying this case, and definitely something that should not have passed quality control, in my opinion. Anyway, they offer separate warranties for different parts, so you get 2 years on the case and the cooler, and a nice 10-year-long warranty for the power supply, which is all pretty typical. But my concern here is that if your cooler dies after 3 years, for example, it might be very difficult to repair it or to replace it because it is not a typical format and you cannot find it in the stores. So we did ask Cooler Master what happens then, and they replied that they understand the concern and they might add the cooler itself as a separate part in their own web shop, which, yeah, would be a very decent solution for a niche product like this one. But we still need to see if that will happen, and we still need to hope that it will be there 3 years from now. I will update the description down below or leave a comment under this video if I hear more about this. But let's see how this case performs. In a typical gaming workload, all the temperatures looked completely fine. With the build limited to 40 decibels at 50 centimeters of distance, the RTX 4080 Super looked completely comfortable. 69 degrees Celsius on the cores and 76 on the memory, while drawing 300 watts exactly. The CPU ran at 73 degrees Celsius while running just under 80 watts on average, with an internal case temperature of 42 degrees in the motherboard area. So these temps are a bit higher than you would see on a large ATX case, but they're completely fine for a small ITX build where everything is just packed up tight. While stressing the CPU only, we ran into thermal limits at around 170 watts. All other sensors are great, but we cannot really push more from this AMD CPU itself. And this is probably the result of the CPU cooler being blocked on one side by the power supply and on the other side by the graphics card. So we did another test with a smaller GPU, which does improve CPU cooling a little bit, but obviously not enough. So I think Cooler Master mostly had gaming builds in mind for this case and not systems that are built around high-powered CPUs. And I would say a Ryzen 7 7800X 3D or something similar is probably the way to go in this case, or an i5 13600K or 14600K. Because if you go for an i7 or an i9 that will pull around 250 watts of power or even more, it is going to struggle in this case, even if you give the cooler a bit more space. But the GPU choice, on the other hand, is not really limited at all. Anything from a 200-watt RTX 4070 Super to a 300-watt card like an RTX 4080 Super would make the most sense in this case, but you can easily go even higher if you want. As far as price goes, there are definitely different ways to look at it. So it launched at $400 in the US and 400 euros here in the EU, but it already dropped to $380 in the US. So that includes the pre-installed 850 watt power supply that usually costs $130 to $150, the pre-installed water cooler that costs somewhere between $70 and $100, and a GPU riser. So depending on your calculation, the case alone would cost you somewhere between $120 and $180. If your budget is very tight, you can definitely build something different with a small footprint that will be much cheaper than this. But at the same time, I don't really think it is that excessive, considering the fact it offers a very unique look and it is built pretty well. And if you are someone who is already spending extra money on a very clean looking setup and a very specific aesthetic, I don't think it is that unreasonable. That being said, $400 is a lot of money, and for that price, I kind of do think it's fair to expect a higher level of attention to detail, and I do feel that's kind of missing here and there. Now, I think the designers had this fantastic idea of a minimalistic, non-gaming looking case that would fit those super stylish and clean setups that you see all over social media, and they really made the core design work. But there's still something that I would personally like to see different. So the LED on the pump really affects the overall look of the case. And with any PC that is sitting on the desk right next to you, having really quiet idle performance is very important, especially if you use it for work as well. Now, again, I do suspect this is a quality control issue with my sample and a couple of other samples, but in my opinion, they should have caught this early, and a fan stop feature or using a slightly more powerful power supply would have definitely solved this issue completely. And like most ITX cases, there are some general things to keep in mind, like limited storage options, the fact that you shouldn't match it with an i9, and what might happen in a few years if something does break, because you're not just getting a case here, but also a power supply and a cooler, and all that kind of needs to fit your plans as well. And assuming that you're completely fine with all those points above, I think that this is actually a really decent and really interesting case. It offers a fresh new design that is very easy on the eyes, with different color options that really stand out compared to all those simple black and white cases out there. It feels really solid, it is built well, it takes very little space on your desk, and it can easily hold a proper gaming system with a high-end GPU. And not to forget, it makes the whole PC building experience super easy. So if you really like it and it will fit your setup really well, just go for it. Now, that is all I had for today, but before I go, let's hear it from the sponsor of this video. This video was brought to you by Seasonic and their Vertex power supplies. These fully modular power supplies are extremely efficient and very quiet due to their fan design and their hybrid fan mode that stops the fans completely under 40% load. They come with a variety of connections for any kind of system you have in mind, including the 12-volt high-power cable for the latest NVIDIA graphics cards. And to wrap it all up, they now offer a nice and cozy 12-year-long warranty. Check them out using the links in the description below. Thank you all for watching and sticking to the end. I hope this video was helpful enough. If you liked it and you want to see more videos like this one, please do consider clicking that subscribe button so you never miss my future uploads. Bye guys, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!